we're live. Another week, another Queer Confab. This week, we are discussing LGBTQIA plus education in the UK and other places, including Scotland, because surprisingly they differ, even though we're in the same vicinity. So in this episode, we're going to discuss the current state of LGBTQIA education, the laws that shape it, and the impact that it has on students and educators. We're going to also delve into challenges faced through it and what the future holds for inclusive education. So we're going to start off by introducing my lovely panel. We've got 4 guests today, which is more than our usual 3 or 2 or 1, depending on who shows up. But anyways, we're going to start off. Jack, would you like to introduce yourself? Just give us a little bit of a rundown of who you are.
Yes, so I'm Jack. I am a teaching assistant in year 4 in a school in England.
Perfect. Edward, would you like to go next?
Yes, hello, I am Edward. I am a strange man. And
True.
yes, thank you. I am an ordinand, which means I'm training for ordination in the Scottish Episcopal Church. And I have just moved house, which is why my background is in disarray.
Love that. Leo?
Hi, I'm Leo. I work in theatre and film, but I also work freelance as a teacher, largely teaching upper primary over a range of subjects, but in particular drama.
And Robbie?
Hello, I'm Robbie. I am also a drama teacher, but I've also worked as a musical theatre performer, and I'm currently also working at a stage school for young people with additional support needs.
And if it's not obvious, we're all theatre kids. Judging by our profession. I don't even have a profession. I'm unemployed. Someone hire me. Thanks. I'm Zoe. I'm the host for this week and all the previous weeks. We're chatting all things LGBTQIA in Pride Month, which I keep forgetting to mention, which is very strange considering we're in Pride Month. Pride Month. So to preface this, none of us are complete experts in all of these subjects and topics we're going to be discussing. We are just a few friends having a conversation about how the education system is inclusive or not inclusive. I probably know the least, so I'm letting my lovely guest teach me a few things this week. This will be an education for me, an inclusive one at that as well. So we're going to get started. In your own views, can you give us a slight overview of the current state of LGBTQIA plus education in the UK? That can be the whole of the UK, just in Scotland, wherever you are. I'm going to go random, and Edward, we'll start with you.
Oh, goodness sake, why is it always me?
I like to pick on you, it's fun.
Okay, fine. My very rough understanding is that the state of the education, of inclusive education, is slightly better in Scotland than it is in the rest of the UK. But I don't know that for certain, so please no one flame me in the comments.
Tom, don't blame us in the comments.
I think, if memory serves, I think the situation, I think, certainly from my own background, I wasn't in school all that long ago, well, 10 years now, education on sexual orientation is relatively good. There's some work to be done, but it's relatively good. Gender identity is a whole different kettle of fish. And my very rough understanding, once again, is that may have even gotten worse since I was in school, because there's been a bit of a backlash towards it. Yeah, that's my baseline understanding of where I'm coming from.
Perfect. Leo, do you want to give us a little overview of your understanding?
Yeah, sure. I'll again, I don't think I am by any means someone who understands it massively, because I did not attend school for the most part here in the UK. I lived abroad for most of my upbringing. But from what I have seen here in the UK, it's a similar thing to what Edward was saying. There is quite a lot of there's a decent level, I'm not going to say a lot, but there is an acceptable level, I think, of teaching about sexuality. Maybe not like the nuances of it and like the subtle differences between, for example, what is bisexual, what is pansexual, all those kind of things, but to just the teaching that there are different sexual orientations, and that, you know, it's not okay to discriminate based off of that on a very basic level. Whether or not that translates very much into schools and bullying, I don't think it helps massively, but it's something. I would agree. I think it is to do with gender identity where a lot of the issues have arisen, and in particular with the recent guidance that has come out about the fact that gender ideology is not allowed to be taught in schools. Yeah, I think everything to do with gender identity and things like that it's now supposedly not allowed to be spoken about in school, so there is no education about that, basically, is my understanding of it. And certainly in the kids I teach, they have no knowledge whatsoever of trans community, trans issues, anything like that. So yeah.
Perfect. Robbie, we'll move on to you.
Yeah, I would actually completely agree. Like, I think that there's a lot of awareness in the schools nowadays, especially in the schools that I've worked in and what I've seen. There's a lot more of a sense of like an awareness of the different sexualities, different sexual orientations. Maybe that's in like an equalities board, a diversity board, and there's certainly more resources in there. It is something that is intertwined within the curriculum in Scotland. However, the main sort of worry of mine, and I'm sure of everyone else here, is this sort of backwards view on the gender identity. It really baffles me, is why can't that be something that's discussed in education? Why can't that be something that is intertwined into our teachings? It's slightly worrying. However, I would agree. I think, Leo, you said there's like an acceptable amount being taught, and I thought that was probably the best way to sort of conclude on that.
Yeah, fantastic. Jack?
Yeah, so I think so I work in primary school, which is obviously a lot younger children. I think there's more kind of like the materials that there are. So like there are a lot of books now, children's books, that include kind of LGBT characters. So like, you know, a character will have two mums or two dads. And one of the children, I cannot remember the name of it, but there was a book about a boy coming out as non-binary, which was quite interesting. And it's kind of interesting because obviously kids don't really kind of have any, you know, attraction, you would think, at that age. So it's kind of interesting. It's sort of more in primary age, it's sort of teaching them that gay people are real and they exist. So that's kind of the thing that they have.
Bye, Tom. Thank you so much, Jack. Sorry, I got so distracted by Tom just like stomping over like he's storming Norman.
Yeah, I know. I was just approaching him. Now I was like, oh god, he's arrived.
I mean,
I think I know which.
Oh no, on you go, Leo.
No, I was just gonna say, I think, isn't it called like My Shadow's Purple or something?
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the book. Okay, I know which book you're talking about. Yep.
And there's a book as well that's called Julian as a Mermaid, and it's about like a boy, kind of his gender expression is really sweet, which is nice.
Oh, I love that. I mean, from what I remember of sex education and that in school, it was very. I was at school only a few years ago, over a decade ago. And from when I was there, I remember mostly it was so heteronormative. We learned not much. I learned that someone filmed an educational video of losing your virginity in a garden shed, and how to put a condom in a blue dildo.
Yeah,
and that was it was either a banana if there was no money, or a blue dildo if they had a little bit of money.
Yeah,
I remember that it was purple and it had a lot of sort of base. It wasn't a dildo; it had a sort of base to it. And then did Robbie have the same one? Yeah.
Oh no, we had like full on, like there were veins and everything on it.
Yeah, we had to.
Yeah, that was
Well,
that
I mean,
was
education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't help considering I got pregnant.
Yeah,
anyway. So clearly I was not educated correctly. But I had no understanding of anything but the heteronormative relationship. I mean, gender identity, and that was like just not a thing that you spoke about when I was in school. Not whatsoever. It wasn't a thing that you would even think about. Even you know, and any chat about anything bar a heteronormative relationship and that type of penetration, etc. Was not what was taught. I learned more through communities outside about sex education and gender identity, etc., than I ever did in school. I don't know how it is now. I mean, obviously, I've got a son, and he is currently receiving that type of education, but it's obviously at a primary school level. And it has spoken about different families, like you were saying, you know, like the 2 moms, 2 dads, 1 mom, 1 dad, multiples, you know, if that's a thing. So there is more being discussed, especially from a younger age now. Because I always find that if people don't know about these things, that's what then breeds the fear and in turn the hate towards certain communities, because people don't know and don't understand it. I think that's the big thing from what education stands to do. You know, when you put out like, this is how the world is and this is what's in the world, then people are like, all right, cool. That's fine, great. But if they don't know and they don't understand, that's when that like, because if I don't know something, you know, I'm waiting to hear if I'm going to get an interview for something, and that is the fact that I don't know yet is the worst part of it.
The fear of not knowing.
The fear of not knowing, and that's what then breeds hate, is I think how the saying goes. I'm not entirely sure, but what are your thoughts on like that kind of, you know, without education, you know, or with education, would we be in a better sort of world? You can see that I'm veering off. So, Jack, I'll start with you for that. Do you have anything to add to?
Yeah, so I think it's basically just kind of like normalizing everything, really. I think that the thing that which is annoying, especially with primary school age, that they're being like targeted, is that LGBT relationships are automatically more sexualized than straight relationships, which is really interesting, because there are so many things where they're being told, oh, this is a couple and they're 2 women, or this is a couple and they're 2 men. And then the media people are like, they're being talked about gay sex. They're being, you know, I was saying to you before we started, there's a toxic TERF called Posey Parker. And she said that children are being taught, primary school children are being taught about orgasms. And that's just not true. It's just not true. Like, so it's kind of the, like, normalizing and like being honest, but kind of not, I don't know, sensationalizing stuff, you know?
For sure. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with Jack. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It is all about fear of the unknown. So education is kind of how do we get rid of fear? Well, it's fear of the unknown. Okay, so we need to educate about it. That is, at the end of the day, the root of how you get to the bottom of these issues. And I think teaching about, you know, trans issues and like gender identity and those kind of things, not only will it be so helpful for so many kids in schools, but also, even if it doesn't apply to them, which, because there will be some kids, there'll be a lot of kids who don't resonate with it, because there'll be a lot of kids who are cis, and so it doesn't necessarily apply to them, but it will at least take away that fear. But I know I've spoken with Jack outside of this Zoom about the recent guidance that's come out, and I mentioned it already, but the guidance that's come out that they want to pass, where you're not allowed to speak about, again, as they call it, gender ideology at all in schools. It means that we're completely regressing backwards in that regard. But more than that, it also means that, so for example, obviously I'm a trans man, I teach freelance at a lot of schools. I am not continuing to teach within schools and within kind of the standardized education system as next year, because it's not worth it to me for the potential risks and repercussions if a kid asks me a question and I answer and I get in trouble for answering a question. Like, it's, so you're not only just losing the education side of it, you're also going to, I think, with this, lose a lot of teachers who identify with that as well. And so that's just, again, going to make it worse, because then you don't have the teachers in these kids' lives who are trans people, who make them go, oh, okay, this is what a trans person is. I know one, they're my teacher, they're cool, they're fine. Yeah.
Turns out they're just a person.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Exactly.
Turns out I'm not here to recruit your children. I just want to teach. I just want to play some drama games and like teach them
Yeah.
a few things. That's it. That's all I want to do.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in?
I'll jump in.
Edward? Raising my hand. We're
yes.
not actually in a classroom.
Yeah, right.
Teachers, but we're not in a
No,
classroom.
jumping
Don't
on
have
that.
to ask me
Teacher,
to go
that
to
would
the
like
toilet,
it.
Edward.
Jumping on. I'm used to doing that on Zoom though, because there's always the minuscule delay, and it's really annoying if someone goes and you know. Anyway, bleh. Yeah, I'll jump in again. I'd like to say I largely agree with everything that's been said, but I'd like to jump in on the back of what Leo's said with a couple of hopefully semi-coherent thoughts. First things first about education itself and the nature of education. I'm not an educationalist as such. I hope my bishop's not watching because he's very keen on the notion of clergy being teachers. So, but I'll trust that he's not. But my dad was a training corporal in the army and taught music and sciences for a number of years. And something that he was always very keen to talk about when you're talking about how to teach someone is to teach them in a way that either you make sure that they understand why they want to learn it, or you teach them in a way where they don't realize that they're learning anything at all. And that might sound like an odd practice, but I can tell you, having had him for a father, he taught me an awful lot of things that I wouldn't have been interested in learning if he hadn't used that method. How do you implement that method? I don't know. I'm not an educationalist, but it does seem that, especially with, I think Andrew Tate's kind of died a death amongst teenage boys. Some teacher friends of mine said he's not going about as much anymore.
Yeah.
But you know, this whole notion of, it's something that's become really prevalent anyway, is this notion that it's sort of like counter culture, but it's also not. It's really weird. This notion that the boomer hippies that made everything liberal are in power now. So now the real rebellious thing is to be reactionary conservative, which I've never understood. But you know, they've sort of they feel like they've found this truth and that they've jumped onto the bandwagon, and that anything that institutions teach them can't possibly be valid. So if you see what I'm saying, I think if you're able to make them feel like that the reality that you've taught them is the truth that they found, then you remove that sort of us and them educational institutionalization thing. And the other thing I was going to say was about jumping on what you were saying, Jack, about representation and things like that. I think Zoe, I know, likes Hasbin, because literally before we came on, we were talking about Hasbin Hotel. The spin-off, have you seen Hell of a Boss, Zoe?
Well, Has-Been is the spin-off of Hell of a Boss. I'll just preface that.
No, because Hasbin, the pilot was first of Hasbin, and then Hell of a Boss, and then
they
the
made
rest
Hell
of
of a Boss
Hasbin.
first.
Yeah, anyway, I'll take it that Zoe has seen Hell of a Boss, and I'll hope that anyone watch. Yes. The whole Hellverse lore thing is irrelevant, but know that the reason I'm choosing to mention Hell of a Boss is because a lot of the characters are imps in Hell. It's an animated thing, and the imps have horns. Now, those horns are to do with the sex you're assigned at birth. If you're male, then they're white and black striped, and if you're female, then they're just black with tiny little white stripes. The reason I'm mentioning this is because once you know that, you discover there are loads of trans characters in Hell of a Boss. And the fact that they are trans the attention is never drawn to it. They are just a person. They are just a trans character in the show. Sometimes a background character, sometimes a fairly central character. And I really, really, really like that. Not that I'm not in favor of having... It's one of these things that's important not to have it be hackneyed, I think. It's sort of best to treat it as if it was always there and say, it wasn't, here it is now. Anyway, I hope that my points are semi-coherent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also really enjoy the fact that you're training to be a minister in the Episcopalian Church, and you watch things like Aspen Hotel, which is
there's a surprising amount of Catholic theology to be found in Hasbin Hotel, which we can expand upon on another occasion.
Absolutely. Robbie, is there anything that you want to add on the discussion?
Well, yeah, no, I've really been enjoying the discussion, and I really like some of the points that have come up. What you were talking about, Edward, about you know, how your father was talking about that sort of way of teaching without the learners like realizing what they're learning. That's something that is quite heavily implemented within my own teaching, and I know that a lot of other drama teachers do it. We like to try and teach these topics and these sort of difficult topics that you know, young teenagers, they might not be ready to talk about or learn about. And we sort of teach them it through drama. We get them to create their own wee stories and give them the story as a stimulus. So that's something that I know that is happening in Scottish education in the drama teacher community. I'm not sure how well that's going around, especially in terms of things like trans identity and gender identity. I'm not too sure where we're at there just yet. But yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I mean, that was something we weren't actually expected to chat about, but as many people who have been on this podcast with me before will learn, I will have a set thing of questions and then probably go off of it when I hear something that I like and feed more into that. Perfect. So we're going to go on to discuss some of the key laws and policies that influence LGBTQIA plus education. You'll see me kind of looking off at the screen because I'm also trying to learn about these things. So I have here in front of me, this is the House of Commons Library. Provisions to support gender questioning children in school is what it is titled. It was posted on the 28th of April 2024, so if you did want to have a look at it, feel free. And it discusses things like the Equality Act 2010 and how that's implemented in schools. Published guidance and advice for toilet facilities and changing rooms, sports school uniforms, and relationship and sex education curriculum. So when we look at that, what I can see here is, again, we're looking at this in real time. So you're learning with me, audience. So it says here, Section 34 of the Children and Social Work Act 2017 requires relationships and sex education to be taught in all schools in England. So this is specifically for England. All primary schools in England teaching relationship education, all secondary schools teaching relationship and sex education, retaining the parental right of withdrawal from sex education, flexibility for schools in their approach, including for faith schools to teach within tenets of their faith, reform statutory guidance. We've also got the relationship education, relationship and sex education, health education, England, that's my parentheses, regulations, which brought these changes into force in September of 2020. I don't know why they have to be so long, their titles. That's like the whole thing in one go. And yeah, so this is just all your guidance of what happens in schools in England. Kind of got a rundown of it. I'm interested to know, for those who currently teach in England, do you think that this is implemented well? Do you think that they stick to what they're speaking about in here? Are there any other legislations that you know of that either hinder or help the education in England? And then we'll move on a little bit to talk about Scotland. Jack, I'll start with you if there's anything you want to add.
Not that I can think of. I know that they kind of do a lot of kind of stuff on, they do some stuff with primary school children about gender, but it's more a case of like, is this for a boy and this for a girl type things. It's still quite binary, but it's more kind of saying like, oh, if you're a boy and you like this, that's okay. And if you're a girl, you like this, it's okay. So for like younger children, I know that with like the oldest one, so we go up to year 6 in England. I think they do some more kind of, it's more like puberty, like sex wise. So it's kind of like your body changing and stuff. But yeah, I did find it was still quite gendered. So like the teacher, what I noticed when the teacher was like, so when a woman has a period, and I was like, well, not necessarily. And then kind of certain things where it was the language was very gendered still, which was interesting.
Leo, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to what Jack said. I think the language is still largely very within the binary of how it's taught. And I would like to make it very clear, I think in comparison to, you know, sex education in many other places in the world, to give credit where credit is due, the sex education in the public school system in the UK is actually, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. but yeah, it is still very much gendered, and kind of, again, it doesn't really talk about sex at all at the primary school level, despite what Posey Parker and other turfs say. You only get to that in secondary schools, which I've spent a little bit of time teaching in secondary schools, and that is covered relatively comprehensively, along with, you know, sexuality and stuff, and that's very clearly integrated into the curriculum, and they do it in their form classes. But I don't have any memory of seeing anything when we were going through that curriculum with the teachers, and I could be wrong. I don't have a memory of going through that curriculum and seeing anything about gender in terms of like gender expression, potentially, but not in terms of gender identity. I think they're more willing to talk about gender expression.
Right.
That's kind of a little bit more, that's kind of the closest that we've gotten so far. It's like, if you want to wear dresses and you're a boy, that's okay. Like, we've gotten that far. But it's like, if you're a boy who likes to wear dresses who then decides you're a girl, there's not a whole lot of stuff in place for that within our current policies and our current guidance. Yeah.
It's more like boys can like pink. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's moving really far from the heteronormative narrative. The speedlight's the way, you know?
The bar is on the ground.
Yeah.
The bar is beneath. The bar has buried itself 6 feet under.
Honestly, joke.
Can I say that with the competency of our MPs, I doubt it was intentional, but you can drive a coach and horses through that act. From what you read, Zoe, there's absolutely no legislative provision for insisting on teaching gender identity. It might sound like there is, but there isn't. If you look at the text about, kids must be taught about sex and relationships. Well,
but it's up to the schools.
That means legislatively, all that it requires that you teach is that sex exists and that relationships exist. It doesn't require you legislatively to teach anything else from the text of that act. Sorry, I'm going to take my legal hat off.
No, but I think just to build on what Edward said, I think you're absolutely right, and in particular, I know I keep bringing it up, but the again, it has not passed into law officially at this point. I don't think. I would need to check this. But they have like a whole new set of things now where legally there's like setting boundaries of like when you're allowed to start teaching certain things as well. Like, you're not even allowed to start properly teaching about sex. Supposedly it's proposed until I think it was 13 years old, whatever the equivalent like year is for that, which feels very ridiculous to me. Yeah, and so up until that point, you're only really allowed to teach about like birth and conception and like the scientific side of it is their proposed thing, along with obviously basically banning any discussions around gender identity. So yeah, it's already quite lenient to what you can exclude from it, but they're now also trying to push a thing of actually forcibly excluding certain things, certainly until a certain age, which I think is particularly interesting.
Right. Robbie, anything else you want to add to that discussion?
Well, I'm thinking about like I've not heard of those acts that you discussed until just now, but I know that the Equality Act in Scotland is something that is quite it's heavily referenced in our education system. It's heavily used in schools. You know, it's something that we can approach the pupils with if we if we're experiencing a pupil that's discriminating someone for their gender identity, for their sexuality. And it's something that, our teachers it's part of their role to challenge that. But I do find it quite interesting that it seems almost like limiting and almost as if not every teacher is going to know how to challenge that and how to deal with that. Because, not all teachers and not all people that work in education come from maybe a queer background. It might be something that's completely different to them. I think that makes sense. Sorry, I just kind of
absolutely does.
letting everything out.
And the thing with the Equality Act as well, like it says, you know, like it's unlawful to discriminate people on a certain basis, but let's not teach people about what those different bases are.
Yeah.
You know, do you know what I mean? This is kind of what I'm picking up from it. You know, like you can't say anything about this. But you also don't get to know and understand what it is because nobody's going to educate you on it because we shouldn't be learning about these things because you're all too young and it's all too sexualized.
That's a really, sorry, could I jump in for a sec? That's a really interesting one.
Edward, yeah.
No, I know, but you're sort of cheering it, aren't you? Come on. Anyway, yeah, I'll jump in for a sec and say, that's a really interesting point that you've both touched on there, Zoe and Robbie, because I can remember back probably just before the Equality Act was passed, talking to my friends at school about what subjects we were doing that were necessary, what that we felt were necessary, and what ones that we felt weren't. And this was a fairly varied group of kids, but at least half of them would grow up to be sort of lads, and not necessarily particularly liberal politically or anything like that. And we all agreed that RMPS, as we call it in Scotland, or RE, as I think it's called in the rest of the UK, was an essential subject because you needed to understand other people's beliefs. Now, of course, religious belief is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. And if that's a group of guys, especially very heteronormative, very cis, very etc. guys, you know, over 15 years ago, saying that it was an essential to learn about other people's beliefs and identity, what has changed? And the point I'm making there is I think if you really sat down kids that are between the ages of 10 and 15, let's say, of any identity, background, and political viewpoint, and got them to examine the logic behind inclusive teaching, I don't think they'd have an issue with it. I think it's all scaremongering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Just some people's favorite way to live is scaremongering.
Yeah.
I think people make a hobby out of it nowadays. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
A hobby,
exactly.
and sometimes a profession.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. No, that was a really good discussion, guys. So we've kind of spoke a little bit about this, but I'm unsure of this. But we have spoken about how, you know, gender identity is not really integrated into the curriculum. Sex education differences are. Where else do you guys think that the curriculum is lacking in teaching about LGBTQIA issues and topics? Jack, we'll start with you.
So yeah, it's interesting again. And it was maybe just a mistake, but we were doing about marriage in one of the RE lessons. RE or RS sometimes. Oh, look who it is!
I know he's back again while you're speaking.
Oh, I can't hear any of you.
No.
But...
Sounding like you're the worst person on earth. None of us even like you. You're terrible.
They say they love you.
Oh,
you're doing great. You're doing great.
Oh, wait, am I? Is there? What's the new way of doing this?
This.
No, not that. Like
right. I don't like that. It's the new way of doing it. I've always done it that way.
Yeah, me too.
I've always done it this way.
No, that's
There's
how I
this
do it. That's
Korean
how I
one.
do it.
Um,
What's the Korean one? Oh, yeah,
Well, I
okay.
I
can't
have
do
that on a
that.
t-shirt somewhere, but I don't know where it
yeah,
is.
it's cool. So basically, we were doing an RE lesson and it was about marriage. So the kids were shown like a Hindu marriage, Christian marriage, you know, a Jewish marriage, There wasn't a gay couple. I was like, how hard was it to include a gay couple as well? You know? So I was like, they knew what like a Korean religious marriage looked like. But I was like, but you couldn't have got two, you know, you couldn't have got a couple that was same sex, could you? So I was a bit like, in 2024, and maybe it was a mistake, I'll give, you know, the teacher a benefit of the doubt, but I was a bit like, I don't know. But I think, this is just me on my soapbox, I think that there's a lot of the education system that's so old-fashioned anyway. Kids learn loads about physical cash. They're not going to use that. They're going to have some weird like eye scanner when they're older. And also, like physically handwriting. There's so much emphasis on that. And it's like, again, I hardly ever handwrite stuff. So I think the system it's very old fashioned and broken in general, because the 50-year-olds in Parliament, like, well, that's what I did and it was fine. It's just like, and a lot of the stuff that they're learning about, like even kind of topics, I remember learning about when I was at school 20 years ago. So it's just a bit like, I just don't understand it. So,
yeah, it's not getting with the times. It's not down with the kids.
Absolutely not. It really isn't. Like, they're like, so with cash, and you're like, they're not going to use cash. Like, how much change will I get? Literally. I'm like, kids know how to scan a QR code. Why are you telling them about, like, so this is a 20 pence? It's just like, it's so old fashioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
I'm gonna bite my tongue and not talk about how much I love cash. No, in all seriousness, I agree, broadly speaking, Jack, and I want to jump in and play devil's advocate for one split second and say, I don't think any, or when those videos would have been filmed, any of the mainstream Christian denominations in England had gay marriage. So yeah, that might explain why there wasn't any footage of a gay couple, because you could have had a gay civil marriage, but if that was an RE lesson, that's not a religion, that's a civil marriage.
Oh, it was just pictures, because
right, okay. Oh, I see.
General.
Sorry, right.
Yeah, it was just talking about marriage in general. So I was like, interesting.
Right, yes, that is odd. Okay.
Leo, Robbie, anything you guys want to add?
I would agree with what Jack's saying. Like, there's little things that education could be doing where it is just like, okay, so yeah, here is a same-sex couple, or here's a family with a same-sex parents. Just like adding in those little bits of LGBTQIA plus within the teaching and just having that sort of awareness surrounding it, it makes such a difference. Because if you've got like a wee kid that sat there and they're not sure about themselves, and they might see themselves in something that they're learning in school, and the difference that's going to make their relationship with their teachers, their understanding of themselves, because education is so powerful, and it can really transform like a young person's life if it's done correctly. And I just feel sorry for the youth that aren't being able to understand themselves and the community that they're going to be going into. Yeah, got quite passionate there.
Yeah.
No, and I wonder, interesting with your drama teaching, Robbie, is this is another thing, like with a lot of like gay themed plays, they're always about AIDS. Always. There's never any like, oh, it's just a kind of drama story and there's a gay couple involved. It's always, literally, they're always having a happy gay couple and one of them starts coughing. You're like, oh, here we go. And it's just like, I don't know, like, especially now, and it's like, obviously I understand that was an awful time, and I do think as well the inclusion of LGBT history, which is actually quite an interesting thing that's in February. That's quite an interesting thing that's new. But like, especially with drama, why not just do a play that is maybe a straight couple, and could it work with a gay couple? I think a lot of the time, probably,
Yeah, luckily, our like exam board in Scotland, they actually allow that now. So if we've got like for like when they're doing their GCSEs, but we call it nationals, and their hires, they can actually choose to play a role. Like, it doesn't really matter what gender they are, and they can play any role they want, which is quite nice. Because I would agree with you, it's like always that sort of AIDS dying character, or a lot of the time, when people play a gay character, it's especially a man, it's always just the flamboyant, the sassy one, and but it's like that's not just what it's about.
No, exactly.
I think actually, firstly, that Robbie, your point there was I absolutely agree with. I think seeing it integrated just more normally into things is so important. It's so exceptionally important, because it just, not only then do you have the education, but you have the normalization as well, which is kind of like the next step in it. But I think also my only contribution to the discussion was going to be exactly what Jack said, which is queer history. I learned, other than like a very vague thing about like AIDS happened, that was basically the extent of the queer history that I was taught. And since then, obviously, I've gone to a drama school where I took modules where we learned about queer history and all these things, and the the richness of like queer history and like the stories that you hear are incredible, and I don't know why they're not implemented into schools. Things like, you know, Stonewall, or even if we're talking about the AIDS crisis, like I only learned like whatever it was like last year, the whole thing about why L is the first thing in LGBTQIA plus, and then when I learned that, I was like, that's an amazing queer like piece of queer history. Why is this not taught in schools? Because that's such an amazing moment in our history. So yeah, I think queer history is the big place where it's lacking, because there is none of that. There is nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leo,
On you go, Edward.
Leo, I actually don't know why L is first. I'd love to know.
Oh, well, I'm going to explain this very poorly. The person who explains to me, and the article I then proceeded to read about it, will be much more eloquent than my explanation. But basically, the acronym was only created post the AIDS crisis. And the reason that L is the first letter is because during the AIDS crisis, obviously no one really wanted to take care of the people who had AIDS, because they were like, we might get it, because there was a lack of understanding about the disease, and they're gay men and therefore we don't care. So it ended up being the lesbian community who largely cared for and nursed the gay men in the AIDS crisis. And so as a tribute to that is why L is the first letter in the acronym.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. Thank you. Yes, that was I was actually going to bring that up after, but I'm glad we started discussing it. Was the whole, like, we talked a lot about the relationship and the sex education in the curriculum, but we weren't really discussing, you know, like the historical aspects, because we learned so much about World War One, World War Two, Black history, and the movement with that, but there is so few things. Like, I cannot pinpoint anything that I can remember that I learned in school about issues and the history of the LGBTQIA plus. I could not tell you anything I learned. Everything that I have learned about the history of the history of the LGBTQ, and that is through people within the community.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Nothing,
Media as well.
Nothing in school. Yeah. Yeah, and I think you know, we talk about all these important things that have happened within our history and within our past, and there are issues still ongoing as well. But it just seems to be like the LGBTQ are left behind almost.
Yeah.
Like, it's not as important. But why not? Why is it not as important? You know, we want to discuss about marginalized communities and like how they're affected, and you know, these are the things that should be taught in schools, because they affect everyone. Yes, okay, like issues that within our community affect us, but realistically they affect everyone, because although you yourself might not be part of the LGBTQ, I can tell you for sure that you know someone or you care about someone that is. You know, and even if, you know, like, say your religion doesn't agree with it or whatever, you know, like, we should be learning about everyone's history. Everyone that's had to deal with big massive events. Like, I hardly know anything about Stonewall. I know what happened, and I couldn't give you like a play-by-play. However, I can tell you just about everything that happened before Hitler started on his tirade. And I could tell you almost every line in the Help movie. Because that's what we learn about in schools, and there needs to be more in the education system about the issues and the events that have led to where the LGBTQ is now.
And even as well, sometimes it links when you don't think it does. So I did English A-level. Loads of the writers were gay or bi or something. Like, loads of them. Virginia Woolf, like Oscar Wilde. We learned, we did some like World War One poetry, and like loads of the World War One poets were gay. They were like, hey, I'll write this poem that's not got a gender mentions just in case, but loads of them. It's so interesting how it is all tied.
And according to at least 17 historians, Shakespeare was a little queer.
Yes, correct.
I think again, I'm gonna slightly. I agree. I'm going to preface this by saying that I agree that queer history should absolutely be taught. I think there's perhaps, but my devil's advocate point is, I think there's perhaps a hesitancy on the basis of, like, for example, Richard the Lionheart, who was the King of England in the late 12th century. is believed by a lot of people and popular historians now to have been at least bi. And I will say there's a strong degree of evidence for that. However, we can also, the problem is that the concept of sexual orientation as we understand it now did not exist before the mid-19th century. And if the concept did not exist in his society, could he actually view himself as a bisexual, or did he view himself as a man who occasionally had sex with other men? That's the issue. End of devil's advocate point, because whilst as a semi-historian, I'm hesitant to teach, let's say, like Shakespeare was gay or Richard the Lionheart was bi or whatever, I'm very hesitant to teach that. That doesn't mean we can't teach about queer history from the last 150 years that we can absolutely say verifiably is queer history.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we shouldn't be teaching things that could be possibly speculation.
Yeah.
But there are many events that have happened that have affected the LGBTQIA plus.
The reason I mention that is because, you know, that you've got the standard gamut of school education, and it seems to build up towards stuff like nationalism in the 30s and the Second War and things like that. And you could make the argument that you're essentially being taught the history of politics and society. I would disagree, but you could make that argument, I suppose. So I think perhaps some of the hesitancy is saying, where do we start with queer history? And my response to that is, well, we can't, unfortunately, bring it back to the dawn of time, other than to say it was there. If you want to look at it in a more verifiable sense, you can only start in about 1700 at the most, I would say, in this country anyway. But why not? That's my point. Why not start at 1700? You know, the origins of the Second World War go far back beyond German unification in the 19th century, and that's the earliest point that they'll start teaching you in schools about the origins of World War II. Why don't you talk about the 30 Years' War in the 16th century? Because that had just as much to do as a knock-on effect of the Second World War. Anyway, historian hat coming off now.
I'm going to take your historian hat from it because I have one more fun fact. I don't know this one as well, but just building onto that, there is a fascinating bit of queer history that is involved in World War II, because of course the first ever World War II Nazi book burning was that of I can't think what his name is. I think his name is like Hirschfeld or something like that. He ran a thing called the Institute of Sexology.
Yes.
And he had studies of gay men and lesbians and early medicines for like trans people, and like figuring out how transition surgery and hormone replacement therapy would work, and queer histories and all this stuff written down. It was the first thing the Nazis burned. And again, this was a fact that I did not find out in school. This was a fact I found out from the internet at some point. I can't remember when, but yeah.
But even as well, I think it's kind of erasing. It's basically, I think a lot of British as well it's the erasing of history as well. Is anything where we look bad, they don't really talk about it. So, like for example, with the Holocaust, you know, obviously you kind of think most people think, oh, it's kind of the Jewish people, but there were LGBT people in a lot of the concentration camps. You know, the pink triangle thing. That's what that's about. It's a bit like how I remember, you know, kind of erasing our part in history. It's a bit like I remember learning about slavery at school, but learning about slavery in America. We had slavery in the UK as well, but it's history being erased as well that I think is a big issue too. But I think especially for the LGBT thing, like there was no mention when we learned about the Holocaust at school, there was no mention about LGBT people. I think they were like, oh yeah, LGBT people and disabled people as well. They were there. Yeah. But then mostly go on about, and it's interesting because it's kind of erasing people's history, which is sad.
But something, again, certain members of society love to do.
Yeah.
Well, that's I was about to say fun, but it's absolutely not fun. But that's an interesting, seeing as the Holocaust has been mentioned. What was the death toll of the Holocaust? Does anyone know?
Well, it's 6 million Jews, isn't it? But I don't know about anyone else.
Correct. Yes, that is exactly what I was hoping. The people, what if you ask someone in the street, what's the death toll of the Holocaust? If they have an answer for you, they'll probably say 6 million Jews. No, it's 11 million.
Right.
It's 11 million is the total, at least. And incidentally, it might even be closer to 5 million Jews, because possibly as much as 1 million of those that the Nazis classified as Jews did not regard themselves as being Jewish.
Right.
So either way, it's around half, if not over half, were not Jewish.
Yeah.
And were LGBT plus. A lot of Russian prisoners, about 3 million of them, were Soviet prisoners of war. And you know how many of them could have happened to have been queer as well, we'll never know, etc., etc.
Yeah.
You know, every day is a school day, guys. Literally. Just as a topic to kind of finish off, because I know we're pressed for time. How does having an inclusive LGBTQIA plus education affect students' mental health and well-being? What are the effects of having this inclusivity? I just want to get your thoughts on that. Leo, we'll start with you.
Oh God, why? I mean, and again, I am not someone who really came out. I was out, but as bisexual at school, and there wasn't a ton of education around that. So I know that I felt very alone in that. So my only thing I can think of is if there had been more education, or if I was still in school and I was now identifying as I am now, and there was more education, I just think it would just make you feel a little bit more normal. Because I just think the biggest thing about being queer is I feel like, I won't speak for everyone on this panel, but certainly a lot of my friends who I've spoken to identify as queer, there are just moments where you kind of just feel a bit like an alien. You're just a bit like, what the fuck is going on with me? I don't get it. And just to have someone go, okay, so there are these things, and anyone can be these things, and it's completely fine to be them. It's very normal. This is what it means. And just to teach you a little bit about that, kind of, I just feel like it would just make you feel a little bit less alone and a little bit less afraid and not sure of yourself. I'm not wording it very well, but yeah, I just think it would make you just feel a lot less alone in a sense. Yeah, just a bit more seen.
Yeah. Jack?
Yeah, I think as well, it's mainly sort of feeling like safe as well. So I remember there's that kind of stereotype of like queer kids with their English/drama teacher. I remember that, you know, I was kind of being bullied and like people were saying stuff to me. And my drama teacher was the only one who was like, don't say that. That's not appropriate. And she kind of spoke to me about like, does that happen all the time? And kind of, and I think especially, you know, kind of making kids feel that they're safe. And I think that sometimes that doesn't, I mean, I don't know. I think now it's maybe better, but I think that back, you know, when I was at school, I think there wasn't really that kind of thing of being safe. So I think the teachers were like, oh, well, we don't want to kind of pry into that because that's your kind of, you know, private life. And it's like, well, if someone's being kind of tormented for it, then maybe you should try and step in, you know? So, yeah. So Robbie, drama teachers do a lot more than you think they do. They're the real heroes.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, Edward?
Again, agree with the above. I would say drawing on my own personal experience. As I said when I introduced myself, I am a strange man. And we must always remember that when we consider anything that comes out of Edward's mouth. I, for whatever reason that I don't still really understand, was very comfortable in my skin when I was at school. And fortunately, the only kids that I ever had any bullying from were 12 when I was 17. So, you know, I was able just to laugh. It was water off a duck's back, really. When I say bullying, I mean they were saying things that would have been horribly hurtful and damaging if we'd been the same age. But because I was 6 foot tall and they were tiny, it didn't feel threatening. That's a whole other topic, though. So for me, from my own background, I don't think it would make a difference, but I know how much of a difference it would make, and it does make, to so many other people. And for that alone, the reason I mention that is because of what I was saying earlier about there are so many people and so many kids who think they oppose it. But if you sat them down and forced them to examine the logic of it, I think they'd come to realize very quickly that they're actually in full support of it. The only thing the only other thing I'd say, and I'm not entirely certain, but I do wonder if it would be beneficial to split off sex education and education about sexual orientation and education about gender orientation, because they're such enormous topics. I do wonder if it would be more helpful to teach them separately, but that's potentially. I don't mean separate. I don't mean put them in different I don't mean wall them off. I mean put them in different boxes, if that makes sense. But that's opening a whole other can of worms. And yeah.
Robbie?
Yeah, I agree with all the above. I think that for me, I was quite similar to Jack, like going to school growing up. Like I had no inkling of even, I got bullied for being gay from quite a young age before I even, got to terms with the fact that, oh yeah, hey, I'm gay.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah. And it was almost like by the time I'd come to accept who I was so ashamed of it, because I was like, but everyone doesn't like this. Like I'm different, I'm weird. And it wasn't really until I left school. And to be fair, actually, when I did like theatre with Edward and with Zoe when we were growing up, and there was a bit more diverse in that group of the Amdram and stuff. But it wasn't until I actually left school and moved to Glasgow. And I was like, oh my God, they're everywhere. Like it's such a big accepting world. And I did, like, going into being a teacher, I learned a lot about I don't know if anyone's heard of the Shinari wheel. So for like a child to be in class, child all the way up till they're 18, they have to feel safe, healthy, achieving, nurtured, active, respected, responsible, included. I didn't feel that growing up, when I was in school. And then coming into it, being a teacher, I was like, okay, so now it's my responsibility to make sure they feel that.
Definitely.
So I think, as we kind of touched on before, like it kind of normalizes it, and it gives pupils a sort of more of an acceptance of themselves. And also, like, touching on the sort of drama teacher, English teacher thing, if a teacher is effectively engaging the learners about this, then that's going to make them feel comfortable to talk to an adult about who they are. So hopefully that's the step that we're taking forward now. I could talk about it for days. I'm sure we all could.
No, honestly, that's perfect. I think realistically the takeaway from this is having an inclusive education curriculum creates knowledge and understanding. From the perspective of someone in the community, it creates knowledge and understanding for themselves, and someone who isn't or doesn't identify with the community, it creates a knowledge and understanding of the community and the people within the community. And I think that's really where we lack in a lot of places. But unfortunately, we don't have the time to discuss everything to do with the I know, who knew? We could go on for hours and days. So we're gonna leave off with final words from everyone, and any plugs that you have, upcoming shows or Instagram pages, anything like that. Robbie, you went last. We'll start with you. Any final words and anything you want to plug?
I just want to say thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. I'm not really doing too much performance-wise at the moment, but if you want to hear me singing, my Instagram is Robbie Mackenzie Vocalist, spelled M-A-C-K. I am doing a show in September. September the 6th, which is part of the charity I work for, and it's in the wee village I live in as well. So there'll be a ticket link on there. It's not there right now, but it will be. Thank you.
I don't have anything to plug right now. I only do one show a year these days, typically, and it's just been and gone. It is on YouTube. The Yeoman of the Guard, Aberdeen Gilbert and Sullivan Society 2024. Watch now. Ordinarily, I could probably also say, and if you decide that you want to go to this church on this Sunday of the year, you will see me doing X, Y, and Z. But apparently the rules have changed, and you actually have to step back from leading worship when you're training now, apart from when it's actually for your training. So I now do nothing. And if you want to find me doing anything in a church, you'll have to wait a couple of years. But watch this space and love one another.
Perfect. And also, if you want to see some of the best photos ever on Instagram, go to Edward's page.
Edward.Dickens 123.
When you guys see it, you'll understand what I meant. Leo.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what I have to plug. Obviously the Wandsworth Fringe, which I'm currently at, this beautiful venue, is still going on. So of course, go watch any of the shows in the last week of the Toms for the venue that Tom's running. For myself, the only thing I have to plug is I have a short film premiering this coming Thursday at the Wandsworth Fringe at the Putney Arches venue. It's a double bill of a play called Place We Won't Walk, and the film is called The Kerns. Yeah, I think that's the only thing I have to plug. That will be on the Wandsworth Arts Fringe website. Yeah.
Perfect. And Jack?
Yes, I'm also doing something at the Wandsworth Arts Fringe, beautifully modelled by Leo. It's a queer cabaret. So it's some kind of queer and LGBT artists, hosted by me. So that should be very exciting. Yeah, that's on the 20th of June. Also, going back to this conversation, I got this book, which is called How to Transform Your School into an LGBT-friendly Place. It's backwards, annoyingly, but yeah. This has got some quite sort of useful tips, because a positive thing, I'm kind of in the process of looking at training to be an LGBT youth counsellor. So that's kind of what I'm wanting to do. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed the conversation that we've had. We hope you have too. Next week we will be talking kind of similar terms, but we will be talking all about Section 28. So enjoy your week, and we'll see you next Sunday. Bye, everyone.